So good. Venomar. It's called Venomar. Like when we're saying Kaddish and we say Venomar, Amen, right? And we say, literally, and we say. That's the name of the song. How's everybody doing? It's great to be learning with you on a Wednesday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who's with us on a Wednesday night? And I'll share why I'm in good spirits in a moment. Stephen in New Hampshire, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Pauline in Chicagoland, Shandora in the Bronx, David in Indiana, Marilyn in London, Kentucky, Paula in Chicago, Dawn says Shalom, Lucy in Minnesota, Paul in the Great Northwest, Sharon in Las Vegas, Nancy, North Carolina, Catherine in Cave Junction, Oregon, welcome, Rebecca in LA, Bill in sunny LA. Welcome to LA, Bill. I think we could get a coffee while you're here. Karen in Northern California, Guy in Ohio. Welcome, everybody, over there on the YouTube side. Yitzhak in Kansas City, Patrice in Utah. Great to be with you. I met earlier today. I made a Bikur Cholim call, right? So there are certain actions, mitzvahs, that we do them. They have, we read this in the prayer book every morning, that there are certain mitzvahs that have an unlimited measure, like providing for the needy. And also there are mitzvahs that we do them in this world and we receive a reward for them in this world, and the principle remains for us in the world to come. Like attending the house of study arriving early at the house of study morning and evening, going to a wedding, going to a funeral, visiting the sick. Bikur Cholim. It's a big mitzvah. It's very important, honoring the parents. But whenever you have an opportunity to visit somebody who is ill, it's a great thing, an important thing to do. I have a very close friend. I mean, we've been friends for decades. And, some months ago, I heard that, he was fighting a very, very serious illness, got a really scary diagnosis. Been praying for him 3 times a day ever since. In fact, we'll dedicate today's episode to his complete and speedy recovery, David Ben Mindel Shena. And today he came out of a surgery, a big procedure, and he said, since the diagnosis, that was terrible, that was scary. But everything since then, it was always like the best that it could be. The chemo worked. The surgery got it all. It had to do with there was an organ. He was afraid he was going to lose all of it. He only lost a part of it. And that's a huge difference because the rest can actually come back. So just a lot of good news there. It's looking as good as it can. We're going to keep praying for him that he should make a complete recovery. And because, part of this, his healing involves healing from a change in, his organs, we were talking about eating. Now, I got to say, here's 2 things that we all know, we've all heard them, and we don't really do it. We ignore it. Number 1, you shouldn't drink water when you're eating. Water or anything. Better you should drink a little before you eat, then you eat your food without drinking liquids, and then later you can have some more liquids. But when the food goes into the stomach without accompanying water, wine, booze, soda, milkshakes, whatever, just the food by itself, the stomach is much more efficient. Much less strain on the stomach, and your digestion much more efficient. And secondly, chew your food. Like, not just chew it a little, but chew it till it dissolves in your mouth as much as possible, and you're just going to feel better. If you don't drink liquids while you eat and you chew your food thoroughly, your digestive system has a much better chance of being as efficient as it can be. Now, for most people, they're really healthy. It doesn't matter that much. But if you have any digestive issues at all, if you find yourself, burping, gaseous, stuff like that, skin things that might be related to nutrition, do this. So I am definitely committing to make big improvement on those 2 things. So I pass that on. May we never learn those lessons the hard way. May we learn them when we hear somebody tell us that is wisdom, and we should learn from it there. Also, some good developments that I won't share, except to say that Nina and I are working on a movie. We're sort of in, pre-production or pre-production. But we're in the financing stage. The script is there. We're making this thriller called Guns and Moses. We haven't made a public announcement. I know this is public, but this is intimate. This is our group here. But it's going great. We're really excited. And this is a movie we aim to be shooting later in the year, and that I know that, this group will enjoy our movie. Remember the title, Guns and Moses. All right. We are in chapter 6. We're completing our discussion of the second Mishnah in chapter 6. Yesterday, some challenging material for the modern ear. Today, much less so, and in fact, really interesting as we look in how these kind of marriage procedures were carried out in ancient times. And the big distinction that we're making between how marriage was handled, a couple thousand years ago versus today in the Jewish world is that today, erison, betrothal, and nisuin, marriage or chuppah, or how do they refer to it? Wedding? The difference between marriage. So nisuin is marriage, right? So the difference between betrothal and marriage, between erison and nisuin, these days it's all done on the same day. The day of a Jewish wedding, they will do both the erison, the betrothal, and the nisuin on that same day. They sign the ketubah on that day, the marriage contract, etc. But in ancient times, the betrothal was usually about a year before the nisuin. After they were betrothed, they are married. If one of them goes and commits adultery with some other person, even though the two of them are only betrothed and they have not consummated that union yet, they haven't had marital relations. If one of them has marital relations with someone else, it's adultery. It's a death penalty offense. And now, today, we started to talk about it yesterday. What's in between, betrothal and marriage is the chuppah, right? So standing under the chuppah, under the wedding canopy, or in ancient times, it was a little bit more like secluding with the bride, even though they haven't consummated the union, they haven't celebrated their wedding night yet. When they go into seclusion together or stand under the wedding canopy, either one, then they're fully married, even if they haven't had intercourse yet. And that changes their status, as we shall see. All right, we pick this up at the bottom of 57b. Rami Bar Chama said, with regard to the question of whether there is legal significance to a priest entering the wedding canopy, right, entering the chuppah, so being secluded with the bride or standing under the canopy with her, if he does so with a woman who is unfit to marry a priest, right? So a priest cannot marry a divorcee. A high priest can't even marry a widow. These women would be fit. A Jewish woman who happens to be a widow or a divorcee, any Jew can marry her except a priest. Only the priest is prohibited from marrying a divorcee, and the high priest is even prohibited from marrying a widow. So they would be unfit for a priest. So if he betrothed her, what is the status? Then what if he stands under the wedding canopy with her? And is that full marriage, or does anything further change when they actually have intercourse together and consummate the union? So Rami Bar Chama says that with regard to the question of whether there is a legal significance to a priest entering the wedding canopy with women who are unfit to marry a priest, now we have arrived at the dispute in the Mishnah between Rabbi Meir on the one hand and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon on the other. Now we're at 58a. According to Rabbi Meir, who says that betrothal to a priest disqualifies a woman who is unfit to marry him from partaking of teruma. How does she become fit to partake of teruma? Not by marrying a priest whom she is unfit to marry. This woman is fit to eat teruma because she's the daughter of a priest, right? She was eating teruma as a member of her father's household, and now she's going to be betrothed to a priest. Normally, if it was her first marriage, or if her husband died and she's a widow and this is a regular priest, no problem, right? She can go from her father's house where she's eating teruma to her new husband's house and eat teruma with him. But if she was divorced from the first husband, she is not allowed to marry that priest. And if she does marry that priest, she actually becomes unfit to eat teruma. Neither does her husband give her the right to eat teruma, since that wedding is prohibited, and she loses the right to eat teruma of her father's household. Teruma is consecrated food that only priests can eat. So according to Rabbi Meir, who says that betrothal to a priest disqualifies a woman if she is unfit to marry a priest, even from partaking teruma from her father's house. Betrothal will disqualify her even from eating her father's teruma. What about entering the wedding canopy? This would also disqualify her, according to Rabbi Meir. Conversely, according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who say that if she can eat teruma in her father's house, the mere fact of betrothing a priest, even though she's a divorcee and she's not allowed to marry him, the fact that they've only become betrothed and they're not married does not disqualify her from eating teruma until she actually has intercourse with the new husband, who's prohibited to her because she's a divorcee. Until she has that and they consummate that union, she can continue to eat the teruma of her father. Why? Because a betrothed woman still lives in her father's house. She hasn't started living in her husband's house yet, so it would only make sense that she can continue to eat the teruma in her father's house. Now, the Gemara refutes this claim. And from where do we know? It refutes the claim that we have arrived with the question of just stepping under the wedding canopy. Does that is the subject of a dispute between Meir on the one side and Elazar and Shimon on the other side. The Gemara refutes this claim. And from where do we know that these Tanaim, these rabbis of the Mishnah, Meir on one side, Elazar and Shimon on the other, from where do we know that these rabbis would apply their opinions with regard to betrothal, their opinions on betrothal? How do we know that they would apply those opinions to standing under the wedding canopy? Maybe they wouldn't. Perhaps Rabbi Meir only stated his opinion there with regard to betrothal, that it would disqualify from eating teruma in her father's house. Why? Because betrothal acquires her. That's the change of status. However, in the case of the wedding canopy, which does not actually acquire her, no, she is not disqualified. Alternatively, perhaps Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon stated their opinion only there with regard to betrothal, as it is not close to an act of sexual intercourse. However, with regard to entering the wedding canopy, which is close to an act of intercourse, right? You're under the wedding canopy, and then that night, you're, having a wedding night. So, however, which is close to the act of sexual intercourse, as it is the place where the bride and groom are secluded together, right? So that's more that chuppah, as it was understood in ancient times, that sometimes it wasn't just a public wedding under a talus, but it was in fact what the wedding canopy meant was the place where the bride and groom went in to consummate the union. So that is the place where they secluded together, and it symbolizes the woman's entrance into her husband's home. Now they are fully married. And so it is possible that it also disqualifies her from partaking of teruma. Even if they didn't actually have intercourse, the fact that they were in the place of seclusion as a husband and wife, it's like they had intercourse. They're fully married, and it should count in that way. And that's why it would and since she's prohibited to this priest because she's a divorcee, it's after standing in under the wedding canopy with him, even if they didn't have intercourse, that she becomes disqualified from eating the teruma in her father's house. Rather, if it can be said that this issue was already discussed by earlier sages, it was in the dispute between these other rabbis, two rabbis we haven't even talked about yet, as it is taught in a baraisa, if they married one another, i.e., either a woman who is fit or a woman who is unfit to marry a priest, if she married the priest, or they entered the wedding canopy and they did not yet have intercourse with him, still they are entitled to eat of his food and to partake of teruma. Oh, interesting. So this woman, that whether she's fit or unfit, until she actually has intercourse with him, she hasn't become disqualified as a divorcee, prohibited to marry a priest who violated that prohibition, not until they actually have intercourse, and therefore she can continue eating teruma in her father's house. Now the Gemara interrupts its presentation of this baraisa, which seems to say that intercourse is the definitive moment, and until then she can eat her father's teruma. Gemara interrupts to examine the wording of the Baraisa. Before analyzing the Baraisa, is going to talk about the wording of the Baraisa. The fact that the Baraisa mentions a case where they entered the wedding canopy but did not yet have intercourse proves by inference that the earlier case where they married is referring to actual marriage. However, this is difficult because if they were actually married and had engaged in intercourse, well, then the woman who was unfit to marry a priest is certainly disqualified from partaking of teruma, whether in any priest's house, including her father's, because she was a divorcee that married this priest who was unfit for her. And she would be disqualified. Rather, is it not that the Baraisa is referring to a single case where they were married and they entered the canopy and had not yet had intercourse? And it is taught in the Baraisa that they are entitled to partake of his food and to partake of teruma. And this indicates that entrance into the wedding canopy does not disqualify a woman who is unfit to marry a priest from eating teruma, although the act of intercourse does. So according to this Baraisa, entering the canopy, even though that's the location where they will have intercourse, until they have intercourse, she is not disqualified. She hasn't violated the prohibition of a divorcee and a priest to marry, and she can still partake of her father's teruma. She hasn't been disqualified yet. The Baraisa continues, conversely, Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, says, any woman whose act of intercourse entitles her to partake of teruma, meaning a woman who's the daughter of an Israelite who marries a priest, she can only start eating teruma when they have intercourse. Right? So any woman whose act of intercourse entitles her to partake of teruma, her wedding canopy also entitles her to partake of teruma. As soon as they're in the seclusion where they might have intercourse, she can now start eating teruma. It is symbolized that she has left her father's house and entered her husband's house. And any woman whose act of intercourse does not entitle her to partake of teruma, her wedding canopy also does not entitle her to partake of teruma. Consequently, it appears that the Tanaim cited in this Baraisa disagree over the very question of whether the entry of a priest and a woman unfit to marry him into the wedding canopy has legal significance or not. If she is unfit to marry this guy, then, right, when they have intercourse, that's not going to enable her to partake of teruma. If she already was able to eat teruma, now she has to stop. And if she wasn't, being a divorcee and having intercourse with a priest is not going to enable her to partake of teruma. And for her, entering the wedding canopy with him won't enable her either. It's like entering the canopy and having intercourse is all one act. The Baraisa, so the Gemara refutes that claim. From where do we know that this is correct? Perhaps Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who said that in the case of the betrothal of a woman who is unfit for a priest, she may not take of teruma. The Gemara expresses surprise. According to this suggestion, this expression in the Baraisa is difficult. Any woman whose act of intercourse does not entitle her to partake of teruma, her wedding canopy also does not entitle her to partake of teruma. It should have said, any woman whose act of intercourse does not entitle her to partake of teruma. Her betrothal money, the exchange of whatever, something of value that was the act of betrothal, that also does not entitle her to partake of teruma. But if she's permitted to this guy, then perhaps she could start partaking of teruma from the moment of betrothal. The Gemara counters this argument. Perhaps it can be suggested that since the first Tana said his ruling with regard to a wedding canopy, so Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, also said his ruling with regard to a wedding canopy, even though he holds that she was already disqualified from the time of her betrothal. Right? We're using the information in a Baraisa to address our Mishna, but the Baraisa and the Mishna might have been answering slightly different questions, and that's why they might not line up so well. Rav Amram said, this matter was said to us by Rav Sheshes, and he illuminated our eyes from the Mishnah. He didn't rely on a Baraisa. He was able to answer the question from this Mishnah, i.e., he demonstrated that the Mishnah serves as the basis for his opinion. Rav Sheshes said like this, there is significance to a priest entering the wedding canopy with women who are unfit to marry a priest. And the Tana of the Mishnah also taught this law with regard to a sota, the suspected adulteress. When a sota is brought to the temple to drink the bitter waters, she affirms the oath imposed on her by a priest that she has not committed adultery. And the Mishnah explains that when she says Amen, it is as though she herself states that I did not go astray from my husband, neither while I was married to him, nor while I was betrothed to him. Right? What led to the suspected adulteress drinking those waters when the temple is standing is that her husband became suspicious of her, and some particular man said to the wife, do not seclude yourself with that man. You are under suspicion that you're committing adultery with him. So don't put yourself in a situation where anybody could think that you were, having marital relations with him. Do not seclude yourself with that man. And then she secluded herself with him. At that point, the husband and wife become forbidden to each other because she violated that warning, do not seclude yourself with that man with whom you've suspected of having relations, and she did it anyway. And then if she continues to protest her innocence, they're going to go to the temple, they're going to go through this ritual, they're going to write the words of the passage from the Torah on a piece of paper, dissolve it in water with some dirt from the floor of the temple. She'll drink that. If she's innocent, she'll be fine. If she's guilty, the waters will cause her to die. When she affirms that she never committed adultery while standing in the temple and drinking those waters, she will say, I never committed adultery, not when I was married to him and not when I was betrothed to him. The Mishnah explains that I did not go astray while betrothed or married or as a widow who was waiting for her Yevam or as a fully married woman. At no stage when I was prohibited to other men did I commit adultery. And the Gemara inquires, this case of a betrothed woman, what are the circumstances? If we say that he was jealous of her and warned her not to seclude herself with a particular man while they were betrothed, but before they were married, and he also causes her to drink the waters when she is betrothed, is a betrothed woman fit to drink the waters of a sota? No. You don't go through the whole sota ceremony when you're only betrothed. This only applies to a married couple, a fully married couple. Didn't we learn in the Mishnah in Tractate Sota on page 23, a betrothed woman and a widow waiting for her Yavam do not drink the waters. As the halacha, the law of the Sota waters, applies only to married women, and they do not collect their marriage contract if they secluded themselves after being warned, as they have acted in a licentious fashion. Maybe they don't want to drink the waters, but if they were warned not to seclude themselves with a particular man, and they did seclude themselves with that man, then they're prohibited to each other. And if they don't want it, if she doesn't want to drink the waters, they can divorce. But if they divorce, he doesn't pay the ketubah because she acted in this licentious manner. But that only counts when they're married. Although she'll swear if they do go to the temple and do that ceremony, only when the temple is standing. We don't do this, haven't done in thousands of years. But when the temple is standing, this was available. If they did go through with that, she would swear that she never committed adultery even when she was betrothed. But if this whole issue that she might have been cheating on him happened while she's betrothed, that is not permitted. She's not allowed to seclude herself. But it doesn't trigger the drinking the sota waters ceremony if it happened only while betrothed. So rather, the case in the first Mishnah above is that he was jealous of her and warned her not to seclude her. And her husband caused her to drink when she was already married. Okay, so rather, this is the right place, right? Yes, okay. So rather, the case of the first Mishnah cited above, that he was jealous of her and warned her not to seclude herself with a particular man when she was betrothed. And she secluded herself with that man, and her husband causes her to drink when she is already married. He warned her while they were betrothed, but he didn't say to her, drink the waters until after they were married. However, in that case, do the waters examine her? It is taught in a baraisa with regard to the verse, and the man shall be clear from iniquity, and that the woman shall bear her iniquity. Numbers 5:31. So that when the man is clear of iniquity, the waters examine his wife. But if the man is not clear of iniquity, the waters do not examine his wife. Why does he have some kind of iniquity on him? I thought he's suspicious of her cheating. By secluding herself with the other man when she was betrothed, the woman rendered herself forbidden to her husband. If he then went ahead and married her, he did something that he is not permitted to do. And so when he slept with his own betrothed to consummate the act of marriage, he actually did something he was not allowed to do because he had warned her not to seclude herself with a man while they were betrothed, and she went ahead and betrothed that and secluded herself with that other guy. At that point, they're prohibited to each other, so he was not permitted to marry her. If she acted that way while they were betrothed, maybe he shouldn't marry her. Rather, it must be that he was jealous of her when she was betrothed and she secluded herself with the other man anyway, and she had entered the wedding canopy but did not yet have intercourse with her husband when he brought her to the priest. Consequently, she is made to drink the sota waters as a married woman. She is a married woman. They haven't had intercourse, so the man hasn't done anything wrong, the husband. So she drinks the sota waters as a married woman. Her husband is not committed to transgression as he has not had intercourse with her. Learn from this that there is significance to a priest entering the wedding canopy with women who are unfit to marry a priest, as demonstrated by the fact that the sota waters will examine her in these circumstances. Right? This is all going back to prove that even before they've had intercourse, if they stand under the wedding canopy or seclude themselves for the purpose of consummating the union, even if they don't actually consummate it, that has legal significance. Rava said, do you hold that this baraisa is sufficiently accurate to rely upon? But when Rabbi Acha Bar Hanina came from the south, he came with this baraisa in hand. The verse states, with regard to the oath of the sota, and some man has lain with you besides your husband. That's what they read to her in the temple, which indicates that it applies only when the cohabitation of the husband preceded that of the adulterer, but not when the cohabitation of the adulterer preceded that of the husband. Consequently, in the case under discussion, drinking the sota waters would not be effective or appropriate. Right? It only works when they have been married, and if the suspicion and the warning not to seclude happened when they were betrothed, and then he married her anyway, he can't later bring her to the temple to drink the sota waters. And Rami Bar Chama said, you find it in a case such as where her betrothed had intercourse with her licentiously when she was a betrothed woman in her father's house. Since the act of intercourse was committed licentiously rather than for the purpose of consummating the marriage, the woman is still considered betrothed. Subsequently, her betrothed warned her not to seclude herself with a particular man, and she disobeyed. And then they entered the wedding canopy together, despite the fact that they are forbidden to one another. Once they entered the wedding canopy, the woman can be made to drink the bitter waters. This proves that there is significance to entering the wedding canopy with a woman that is unfit for one to marry. The Gemara asks, if so, in the corresponding case with regard to a widow waiting for her yavam. Now we're back to yibum, which is why we're in this tractate. So in the corresponding case where there's a widow waiting for her yavam, right, the widow and the brother-in-law, in which the yavam had licentious intercourse with her in her father-in-law's house, right? So this is before they made a levirate betrothal and a proper yibum, but rather it was a licentious intercourse. Do you call her a widow waiting for her yavam? Once they have engaged in intercourse, she's his wife, right? They've made yibum. As Rav said, that one who has intercourse with his yavama, even without intending thereby to perform levirate marriage, he has acquired her for all other matters. And the Gemara responds, this is in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, who said that he has acquired her only with regard to the matters stated in the chapter of levirate marriage, but not with regard to other matters. And therefore, she is not considered his wife with regard to the laws of the sota, right? So you couldn't rely on this yibum sex, without a preceding levirate betrothal to effect a complete marriage, such that if she then secluded herself before, and then you were suspicious of her and wanted to drink the waters of the sota, you're disqualified from that because your marriage doesn't line up with the requirements of the sota law. The Gemara responds, the only reason this proof was presented is to support the opinion of Rav, who is the one who holds that there is legal significance to a priest entering the wedding canopy with a woman who is unfit to marry him. Right? It disqualifies her from eating teruma in her father's house. Didn't Rav say he has acquired her for all matters? And the Gemara answers, With what are we dealing here? For example, a case where the Yavam performed levirate betrothal with her, and afterward he had intercourse with her for the sake of promiscuity rather than to create a yibum. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai, who say levirate betrothal acquires a Yavama in a full-fledged manner and removes the levirate bond. Therefore, when they have intercourse, they do not become fully married. Because they did a levirate betrothal, now they're not considered Yavam and Yavama, they're just engaged. But the only reason they can have sex is because they're Yavam and Yavama. So it's a little confusing. The Gemara raises a difficulty. If so, the case of the Yavama who was betrothed, is the same as the case of a betrothed woman, a regular betrothed woman. What is the difference between the two cases? The Gemara responds, according to your reasoning, are the examples in the Mishna of a married woman and a fully married woman not a single matter? Rather, the Mishna must be referring to two very similar cases with the following difference. A married woman means his own wife, and a fully married woman is referring to that of his fellow, i.e. his brother's wife, who became his wife through levirate marriage. Here too, the case of a betrothed woman is referring to his own wife, and the case of a widow waiting for her Yavam is that of his fellow, i.e. his Yavama, who is now betrothed to him. Rav Papa said, Rava's question can be resolved in a manner unrelated to the question about a priest entering the wedding canopy with a woman that is unfit for him. The Baraisa he cited is in accordance with this Tana, who does not require the man to be clear of iniquity, as it was taught in the Baraisa. One cannot be jealous over a betrothed woman and warn her not to seclude herself with a particular man in order to cause her to drink sota waters when she is betrothed. Not enough. It has to be fully married. But one can be jealous over her to cause her to drink the sota waters when she is married, even if she secluded herself with the man when she was still betrothed. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said the question never arises at all, as the oath is formulated by means of extensions. The woman cannot be forced to drink the sota waters for events that took place while she was betrothed. However, if she is obligated to drink due to events that took place when she was married, then her oath may be extended to include any possible acts of infidelity that she might have committed while she was still betrothed. New subject. Rav Chanina sent in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. One who performs levirate betrothal, sent, right? Like a halakhic question was sent to the rabbis of another community and they sent back an answer. So Rav Chanina sent in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. One who performs levirate betrothal with his Yavama, and he has a brother, even if he is a priest and she is the daughter of a priest, he has disqualified her from partaking of teruma. Why? By Torah law, the other brother may still have intercourse with her and thereby perform levirate marriage. But by rabbinic law, only the brother who betrothed her may perform levirate marriage. Now, due to the fact that she is considered to be waiting for levirate marriage, even vis-a-vis the brother who is rabbinically prohibited from marrying her, right? There are two brothers who are priests, right? They had a third brother who died. Now there's a widow. She comes before each of them, right? Either one of them could perform yibum or chalitza with her. One of them makes a levirate betrothal with her, says, I will marry her, and we are now betrothed. At that moment, she can no longer eat teruma. Why? You see? Due to the fact that she is considered to be waiting for levirate marriage, even vis-a-vis the brother who is rabbinically prohibited from marrying her, since she's betrothed to the other one, she is classified as a woman who is waiting for an invalid act of intercourse. Consequently, she may not partake of teruma until the consummation of the levirate marriage. Why? Because she only did levirate betrothal with one of the brothers, as she should. In case they break off that betrothal, right? Then she would come back into the Yavam situation, the Yibum situation, potentially with the other brother. But because she was betrothed and then she got a bill of divorce, that's the only way to end the betrothal is with a bill of divorce. So now she's a divorced woman. Therefore, she is not permitted to the other brother who is a priest. And therefore, because she's awaiting an invalid act of intercourse, she's disqualified from eating teruma, even if she's the daughter of a priest. So the Gemara asks, according to whom did Rabbi Yochanan make this statement? If we say it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, say that Rabbi Meir said that a woman who is reserved for an invalid act of intercourse may not eat teruma when the act of intercourse is prohibited by Torah law. However, if the act of intercourse is prohibited by rabbinic law, did Rabbi Meir actually say that the woman is disqualified from eating teruma? Rather, if we say it is in accordance with the opinions of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, now that they hold that even a woman who is reserved for intercourse prohibited by Torah law may still partake of teruma before she actually commits that intercourse, is it necessary to state that she may partake of teruma if she is reserved for intercourse that is prohibited only by rabbinic law? Rather, when Ravin came from the land of Israel, he said an accurate version of Rabbi Yochanan's statement. They must have heard it wrong, transmitted it wrong. Now Ravin's got the statement correct. If a Yavam who performed levirate betrothal with his Yevama has a brother, all agree that the Yevama may partake of teruma. If he has a brother who is a halal, so there were 3 brothers, one of them was married to this woman and he died, so now she comes up for Yibum before the 2 other brothers. They were all priests, right? If they have the same father, so they're all priests. The 2 remaining brothers, right? One of them is, let's say, the full brother of the one who died, and the other is a half brother, okay? Has a different mother than the other brother. And this other brother with a different mother, he is a halal, meaning that his father, who was a priest, married a divorced woman and had a son. She was prohibited to him. They had a son, that's a halal. This is the son of a priest who is disqualified from serving as a priest because his father married a woman who was not fit for him. That's a halal. Not a mamzer, but a halal. Okay, so where are we? Yes, so if a Yavam who performed levirate betrothal with his Yavama has a brother, all agree that the Yavama still may partake of teruma. But if he has a brother who is a halal, for example, his mother was a divorcee and therefore unfit to marry his father who was a priest, all agree that the Yevama may not partake of teruma, as she is considered reserved for an invalid act of intercourse. She has this levirate bond, right? Until she performs chalitza or yibum with this other brother, she has a levirate bond with this man who is a halal, and that disqualifies her from eating teruma. They disagreed only in a case where he gave her a bill of divorce. One of the brothers betrothed her and then divorced her. Rabbi Yochanan said she may partake of teruma as she is considered to have returned to her father's house. She's eating teruma on account of her father. While Reish Lakish said that she may not partake even of her father's teruma. And the Gemara analyzes the 2 opinions. Rabbi Yochanan said she may eat teruma because even according to Rabbi Meir, who said in the Mishna that she may not partake of teruma, this applies only when she is waiting for intercourse that is invalid by Torah law. But if the intercourse is prohibited by rabbinic law, she's not actually a divorcee. She just has a levirate bond with somebody that would be prohibited if she is a divorcee and if she had a bill of divorce that she got from the levirate betrothal of this other brother, right? Who said in the Mishnah she may not partake of teruma. This applies only when she's waiting for intercourse that is invalid by Torah law, but if the intercourse is prohibited by rabbinic law, she may still partake of teruma. In this case, since they have not yet performed chalitza, the levirate bond still applies by Torah law, but they are prohibited by rabbinic law from consummating that levirate marriage. And Reish Lakish said she may not partake of teruma because even according to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, who say in the Mishnah that she may partake of teruma, this applies only to a case of betrothal, as a priest can entitle a woman to partake of teruma in a different case of betrothal. But here, where he gave her a bill of divorce, since he cannot entitle a woman to partake of teruma in any other case by giving her a bill of divorce, so no woman becomes entitled to eat teruma by virtue of a bill of divorce. Unless you say here too, in the case of a bill of divorce, he can entitle her to partake of teruma when she returns to her father's house. So this case is different for the following reason. A woman who returns to her father's house has been severed from her husband, and she is close to her father's house. And therefore, she may once again partake of the teruma on her father's account. However, this Yavama, who has received a bill of divorce, is still bound to her Yavam until she performs chalitza, and she is therefore disqualified from eating teruma. New subject. Taught in the Mishnah that in the case of women who married priests, despite the fact that they were unfit to do so, if they were widowed or divorced from that marriage, they are disqualified from eating teruma. But if they were widowed or divorced while they were only betrothed, they are fit to partake of teruma in their father's house. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef raised a dilemma before Shmuel. In the case of a high priest who betrothed a minor and she matured under him, i.e. while betrothed to him, what is the law? And the Gemara clarifies the dilemma. Do we follow the time of the marriage, at which point she was unfit for him, according to most Tanaim, who hold that a high priest may not marry a grown woman, or she is no longer called a wife in her virginity, or do we follow the time of betrothal, at which point she was of suitable age? This, it took me a few minutes to read that, to understand this when I was preparing it. So the high priest must marry a young woman, not a child, but a young woman who is a virgin. And if she kind of gets too old, it's like, even if she's never had sex, she's not like a maiden in her virginity. She's just a little bit too old to be considered that. That is only in the case of a high priest who's getting married. Normally, if you think about this, a high priest is an older man, and he's already married by the time he becomes the high priest, and they're probably not going to appoint him high priest if he's not married. But it could be that he loses his wife while he's high priest, and then they want him to get married, so they're going to, arrange a marriage with him with a quite young woman who is a virgin. And if during the time of betrothal she actually, ages to where she's not considered a young virgin anymore, it's not that she had sex with somebody, but she somehow loses, doesn't satisfy those requirements of being young enough, then there would be this issue. So Shmuel said to him, we're on 59a now. We're actually going to go a little bit into page 59 because there's a new Mishnah there that we'll pick it up with tomorrow, and we have a little bit of time. So Shmuel said to him, you learned it in the Mishnah. If they were widowed or divorced from marriage, they are disqualified from partaking of teruma. But if they were widowed or divorced from betrothal, they are fit to partake of teruma. And this indicates that disqualifications from the privileges of priesthood are determined based upon marriage rather than betrothal. That's what Rabbi Meir argued with Elazar and Shimon. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef said to Shmuel, with regard to causing her to become a halala, right, a divorced woman who marries a priest who she's unfit for, if they do it anyway, their child will be a halal, and she is a halala. Yosef said to Shmuel, with regard to causing her to become a halala, I did not raise a dilemma, as it is clear that it is intercourse that causes her to become a halala, right? When a divorced woman has intercourse with a priest. When I raised a dilemma, it was with regard to the verse pertaining to a high priest, and he shall take a wife in her virginity. What does take mean in this verse? Do we require that only the taking of betrothal must occur when she is in her virginity, i.e. that she is young enough when they are betrothed, but if she ages and they get married when she's a full-grown adult, that's okay? Or do we require that both the betrothal and the marriage should be to a woman young enough to be considered a maiden in her virginity? Shmuel said to him, this too you learned in a Mishnah on page 61, if he betrothed the widow and was subsequently appointed to be high priest, he may marry her. A high priest can't marry a widow. But if he betrothed her before he was appointed high priest, he may actually fulfill the arrangement of the betrothal and marry her. So it was the betrothal that was a dispositive thing, and that happened before he became high priest. If he betrothed the widow and was subsequently appointed high priest, he may marry her, despite the fact that high priest is prohibited from marrying a widow. And this indicates that her permissibility to him is determined according to the time of betrothal, rather than the time of marriage. But the Gemara refutes this proof. Well, there it is different, as it is written, he shall take for a wife. The superfluous expression for a wife in that verse in the Torah, Leviticus 21:14, indicates that he is permitted to marry the widow in this case. Not because of the principle, but because of the superfluous words. And the Gemara objects here too with regard to a woman who matured after betrothal. It is written, and he shall take a wife in her virginity, and this would indicate that he may marry the grown woman in this case. And the Gemara answers that the term wife allows for the inclusion of one case but not two. Consequently, since a high priest may marry a widow he had betrothed before he was appointed high priest, that same word cannot also be derived used to derive the law that he may marry a grown woman that he betrothed before she had matured. And the Gemara asks, and what did you see that led you? I'm almost done. I'm really almost done. And what did you see that led you to include the case of a widow and exclude that of a grown woman? The Gemara answers, in this case, the grown woman, her body has changed, and therefore she is forbidden to him even though she was betrothed before she became fully grown. And in that case, the widow, her body has not changed. It is the priest's personal status that changed from priest to high priest, and therefore she remains permitted. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 in chapter 6. And tomorrow we'll continue with Mishnah number 3. Let's check comments or questions. Okay. Here on Yevamos 58. Some comments on what I mentioned at the top of the show about try to avoid drinking while you're eating. Says Sharon, with certain types of oral phase dysphagia, a liquid wash, a liquid swallow after bites of food are necessary for proper swallowing. So, when it comes to drinking and swallowing, follow a doctor or speech therapist's advice. Thank you very much for that qualification. I think maybe for most people, better to just let your stomach digest without introducing liquids. But if you fall in that category where you need the liquids, obviously totally different situation. Thank you so much for that clarification. Sharon, I thought it was considered improper for a man to be alone with any woman for appearances of impropriety, not a man with a particular pre-existing reputation. Not so much that he has a pre-existing reputation as a philanderer or something, but rather that the husband, I think, heard or saw that his wife had secluded herself with that man already. His wife and this other man behaved in a way that drew suspicion to them. And then the husband says, don't do that again. And she does it anyway. That's what triggers the sota situation. And as we've learned, not merely during the time of their betrothal, but after they're fully married. Bill, so trying to fit this into English language terms, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, must marry a maiden and not a spinster. Sounds right. Like what actually, because obviously they're not saying he needs to marry a child. So what is it like where she's young enough to be considered, a maiden, not old enough to be considered a full-grown woman? Again, they had shorter lifespans, and I'm guessing that this is like somewhere in that teenager stage. But I don't know, and I assume we'll get a better definition of this later. We're not really covering it now. Here was incidental, where the reason we were learning it was just because she had a status change, and that was compared to where he had a status change, being promoted from priest to high priest. Could his betrothal to a widow lead to marriage with her, who would otherwise be prohibited to him? And the answer, yes, but that might not apply to this case of the one who was young enough and then not young enough. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, page 59, and we'll take up Mishnah number 3.